Welcome to the course Migrated Women's Literature. Our today's lecture is about understanding diaspora, migration and the related terms. This is the part 2 of that same lecture which we had discussed yesterday. In the previous lecture, we had talked about migration and the related terms like immigration, emigration and exile. As we know that gradually the terms like immigrant, emigrant, migrant, exile, etc. came to be used less and less. Instead of these terms, an all-encompassing term got prevalent, that is diaspora. However, the term diaspora is used only for migration across international boundaries and not for migration within our nation. Diaspora talks about migration and all the related issues. In the present era, diaspora studies have become a part of most of the academic as well as technical fields. Diaspora studies is not only a part of literature or cultural studies, but it is a part of sociology, economics, history, and impacts foreign affairs, technology, scientific development, and medical research also. Diaspora refers to contemporary migration and has become a buzzword in social sciences and international affairs. If we talk about the current scenario of foreign affairs, we can have an example of Mr. Rishi Sunak, the first Indian to become the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. In his family history, we see a typical example of how Indian diaspora came to be created and added a new chapter to the diaspora studies and impacted certain diasporic communities' foreign policies. Apart from the legal migrations, there is an issue of illegal migration as well. There are various reasons behind illegal migrations. One such reason is war. Due to the wars, millions of people get displaced. Thus, they try to migrate in search of safer and better lives. The matter of illegal migrants crossing the English Channel from France to enter United Kingdom is a big issue currently. These people are a part of unacknowledged diasporic community which is present in almost all parts of the developed world primarily. Another instance of displacement and migration in the present era is millions of Ukrainians migrating to European nations due to the Western nations fighting Russia on the soil of Ukraine. This is the largest migration in Europe since the World War II. There are several other examples where we find that diaspora is the major factor behind most of the current issues and the formation of policies nationally as well as internationally. Now let's talk about the meaning and features of diaspora. Literally, the term diaspora means scattering away or spreading across. When people started moving or scattering from one place to another and settling down there, this process was designated as diaspora. But the major point here is that diaspora refers to the groups of people and not to an individual or a single person. A migrated person is always a part of some diaspora or diasporic community. Thus, the word diaspora, first of all, refers to not individual migrants, but groups of people or to communities. So, if someone works and lives in, say, Oman, that person is not a diaspora, but a part of any specific diaspora there in Oman. For example, a large number of Indians live in Oman and have lived for quite some time. Thus, they are the Indian diaspora community in Oman. And any individual Indian working there who has migrated from India and now settled down in Oman would be a part of that Indian diasporic community there. Again, while to begin with, people who migrated from one place or region were considered migrants. The term diaspora is used for groups of people who move from one nation to another. This has come about after the formation of modern nation states in Europe, where from this concept is spread to other societies. Thus, diaspora may be defined as a group of people who move away for various reasons from one nation to another. Going back into the history, it is believed that the very first recorded diaspora was the exile of Jews when they were ousted and went away to live in Egypt or thereabouts under the leadership of Moses. Most histories of diaspora or definitions refer to the Jews being the first migrant or diasporic community. But it is reasonable to assume that in human history, there must have been migrations of communities before Jews in the parts of the world involving other communities. It is the success of the Jewish domination of academics, particularly their focus on their history of their own community, that the first diasporic community is believed to be theirs. The term diaspora. Let's talk about it. The term diaspora is made up of two words, die meaning away and spare meaning scatter. Thus, it can be said that scattering or spreading away of people constitutes diaspora. As Bill Ashcroft has defined it, voluntary or forcible movements of the people from their homelands into new regions. That is called diaspora. To understand the concept of diaspora in a better way, we can look at the term from two different perspectives given by two different educationists. The first is according to William Safran, who writes in his article, Diasporas in Modern Societies, Myths of Homeland and Return, that diaspora is a particular form of mass migration which involves forced exile and a troubled and lengthy process of resettlement and rerouting in new lands. He has mentioned some specific criteria for calling a community a diasporic community. Safran mentions that the diasporic communities is spread from motherland to two or more countries. They remain attached to each other through common memory, vision, and sometimes myths about their homeland. Also, such communities nurture a belief that they would never be accepted fully by the host country, and thus they long for returning to their homelands. They believe that their descendants would go back home when the circumstances are favorable. Their longing keeps them connected to their homelands and maintains their interest in the social and political affairs of their home countries. Thus, all communities are Janus-phased. We will discuss the term Janus-phased later on. While William Safran talks about compulsive migration, where people leave their homeland due to some compulsions, Robin Cohen, a social scientist, presents a wider picture of diaspora. He believes that diaspora includes voluntary migration along with the forced ones. He states that the term diaspora applies to those groups of people who have settled in a new land for a considerable amount of time. He has added other layers of characteristics to the term diaspora. And he has elaborated that acculturation and assimilation are basic features of diaspora. Not only assimilation into the new country by the immigrants should be treated as a major feature, but their future generations should also be open to assimilation and acceptance. This process is a two-way process where the main focus is upon staying in a new country for a considerable number of years by some diasporic community. Cohen had divided 5 types of diasporas. First of all, he talks about victim diasporas. which is considered to be a form of classic diaspora where people are forced into exile. For example, like Jewish diaspora, African diaspora, Armenian diaspora, etc. Next, Cohen talks about labor diasporas. Here we find mass migration in search of work and economic opportunities, such as Indian diaspora and Turkish diasporas. Third one is trade diaspora. Here migration takes place seeking to open trade routes and links, such as the Chinese and Lebanese diaspora. The example, there is one example also, like Indian Gujaratis, they went to East Africa for trading. So it is one such example of trade diaspora. Now the next one is called imperial diaspora. Cohen has talked about imperial diaspora also. He said that when migration happens because of some reasons like maintaining the empire or increasing the empire, so such migration is called imperial diaspora. Like British diaspora and French diaspora, when British went to different countries to make their colonies, that was also sort of diaspora. It was imperial diaspora. Last one described by Cohen is cultural diaspora, where he says when people move through a process of chain migration such as Caribbean diasporas. Cohen has described all these 5 forms of diaspora in his book Global Diasporas. Interestingly, in the modern era, we have other forms of diasporas as well. With the development in science and technology, along with the available opportunities for better education and jobs, we see that there is one new kind of diaspora building up abroad, that is education diaspora. Here, students from the third world migrate in search of better education opportunities and prefer to settle down in the West, which would provide them better job opportunities as well. We know that during the modern and postmodern times, the term diaspora has gained much prominence due to certain global happenings. Now, diaspora as a term is used in most social sciences and literary studies. It refers to groups of people belonging to a nation who move to other nations and make home there permanently, or at least plan to. They do so for various reasons, of which economic reasons are primary. People generally move for improving their financial status, although there could be other reasons too for such movements, like political reasons, cultural reasons, educational reasons, or simply better quality of life. Diaspora evidently is a process of building new identities, which either leads to shunning the old individuality or generates an extension to fasten to the roots. In any of the conditions, an expatriate stands on the dual fronts, struggling to adapt with the situations, and this expatriate becomes a hybrid. Basically, a person in diaspora plays dual roles, an ambassador and a refugee. He or she represents his or her nation, culture, region, and tradition in the new land, and at the same time, this diasporic person seeks refuge or shelter in that same place. These dual roles run parallel. One involves the prognosis of one's culture and an ability to increase its understanding. The other role seeks refuge and protection and attempts to assimilate into the host culture. Let us talk about some specific features that we notice in most of the diasporic communities. The very first feature is nostalgic anchoring in the past. It is the very first trait that we find in every diasporic community, that they crave for good old days of their homeland. Nostalgia creates a nagging sense of guilt which is associated with leaving the homeland. In the initial phase of every exodus, people feel alienated from the host country and recall their motherland. This state is severe in the condition of forced migration, while in the condition of voluntary migration, a new state evolves where the migrant or the expatriate accepts his or her present life and assimilates into the new culture. The nostalgic state provides the migrants with a kind of comfort zone temporarily. Next feature is creation of different diasporic communities. Every diasporic community is varied and complex. Therefore, all attempts at homogenization are likely to lead to oversimplifications. For instance, if we talk about Indian diaspora, then we find that it is one of the most complex as well as varied diaspora, which showcases various cultural, religious, and linguistic traits. As Bhikhu Parekh writes in his article, Some Reflections on the Indian Diaspora, he says that Indian diaspora represents half a dozen religions, 7 different regions, and nearly a dozen castes. He compares Indian diasporic community with a banyan tree which spreads its roots in several soils and draws nutrition from one when the other dries up. Similarly, diaspora people, despite being away from their homeland, build new homes at other locations. However, this multiplicity of homes does not bridge the gap between home, the culture of origin, and the world, the culture of adoption. The boundaries are always there to limit the people. Next feature is social, cultural, religious, and aesthetic dimensions of diaspora. A diasporic person becomes like a mixture of different cultures. This person carries 2 cultures at the same time, the culture of the homeland and the culture of this new place. So, as the lives of those in diaspora get affected by the cultural as well as socio-political issues of the country, the changes in their social and political circumstances not only affect the immigrant, but sometimes also encourage others to migrate. Most exodus are a result of some or the other economico-political upheaval. Diasporic persons live on the margins of 2 cultures. They carry 2 cultural societies. They neither completely leave with their original identity nor do they fully assimilate into the new one. They exhibit a mixture of the 2 cultures. They present the traits of 2 societies. Writers in diasporic situations are a clear example of cultural amalgamation. They carry their new identity on their sleeves while nurturing their roots within their hearts and also in their writings. Next feature is cultural assimilation. Diaspora is an act of acculturation, and while adopting new rules and ways, somewhere the old ones left behind or are forgotten. Cultural assimilation has never been an easy task. One has to reroute himself or herself and instill new habits. It is considerably an extended process. Every diaspora community shows the traits of the host country overlapping their original values. Settling abroad or becoming diaspora has had its own dynamics since the very beginning. The most prominent being the problem of assimilating into the recipient society. Reluctance to adapt themselves on the part of those coming in and hostility on the part of hosts complicate the matter for diasporic situations. Abdul Jan Muhammad has mentioned 2 specific situations in his writing titled Worldliness Without World, Homelessness as Home towards a definition of the specular border intellectual. he has mentioned two specific situations as specular border intellectual and syncretic border intellectual. Here, the syncretic border intellectual refers to a situation where a person in diaspora is comfortable in both cultures and societies. And this person is combining and synthesizing them. While specular border intellectual describes a person who is unable to be at home in new societies. This condition can be seen in the situation of exile. We know that diaspora studies occupy a significant position in the global literatures as it constructs new identities around the world and creates a hub for global interactions. The present face of diaspora is quite modified and appealing. Now, most of the people accept expatriates relatively with more open heartedness as compared to the past, thus creating a cultural amalgamation. Earlier, diaspora was confined to temporal and spatial metaphors and boundaries. That diaspora had dislocation of roots and an associated feeling of nostalgia and amnesiac experiences. Homi Bhabha, in his book The Location of Culture, shifts the focus from nationhood to culture. He talks about a hybridity that cannot be contained in binary structures. Gatherings of exiles and emigres and refugees, gathering on the edge of foreign cultures, gathering at the frontiers, gathering in the ghettos or cafes of city centers. So, when he talks about these gatherings, so Homi Bhabha means that the diasporic people, when they are in a new culture, when they are in a new society, they prefer to stay together. They prefer to live in one specific locality where most of the people are from their motherland. These new identities are parts of certain diaspora groups. We can divide these diaspora groups into sections like national group, regional group, lingual group, and trade group, etc. National diasporic identity is vast and incorporates all such groups within itself. For example, we can have Indian diasporic community in the USA and all the Indians in USA would feel connected and related to that group, irrespective of their state or region. This broad division becomes specific when these same people start identifying themselves as per their states or regions they belong from and the language they speak, like Gujarati diaspora, Bengali diaspora, Bihari diaspora group, etc. Presently, people have started identifying themselves according to their job or technical field also, like doctors, engineers, traders, etc. So these diaspora groups play a significant role in forming their new identities. Living in diaspora is uprooting and rerouting oneself. It not only talks about migrating from one's homeland, but building a new home, finding a new identity, and rerouting oneself. The act of migration always gets governed by certain choices, reasons, and ideologies, and also by constants generated thereby. Similarly, the use of all these terms migrant, immigrant, emigrant, emigration, exile, refugee, diaspora, expatriate, etc. depends upon the ideologies, choices, reasons, and compulsions. The reasons and compulsions that oversee the act of migration would be discussed in the lectures to come. That is all for today. We would connect again in some other lecture. Thank you.